Welcome and thank you very much for joining us on episode 162 of the Blazers Edge podcast, presented to you today by BlazersEdge.com. I'm your weekend host, Chris Lucia. If you'd like to get a hold of us at the Blazers Edge podcast, please do so anytime by emailing us at blazersedgepodcast@gmail.com, and you can check us out on iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube, and now Google Play. Returning to the Blazers Edge Weekend podcast for the second time is Blazers Edge alum and SI.com NBA writer Ben Golliver. Ben, thanks for coming on the show, man.
Always, man. How's it going?
It's going really well. We're going through this crazy heat wave right now in Portland, and actually Brandon Goldner, my normal co-host, is on vacation in Florida. And speaking of the heat, he ended up laying by the pool a little too long today and got a little bit of heat stroke, so he's not going to be joining us, but I'm excited to have you, Ben.
I'm glad to fill in for him. We got the same initials, so I'll just I could try to talk like him if you want to kind of mimic your normal banter, or I can just talk like myself. Your call.
Let's hear the straight up Ben Golliver takes if we can get him.
All right, let's do it.
So I want to get right into it because we last talked to you, I think it was March, that ended up being one of our most popular podcast episodes of all time. So congratulations on that, I guess.
One of? Where were these listeners? I want the number one spot.
It's up there, man. It's up there. So we last talked, I think it was it must have been 5 months ago. And a lot has happened in the meantime. You had the Blazers have that late season push that they had to get into the playoffs and secure the seed that they did. And then they took out the Clippers in the first round and played relatively well against the Golden State Warriors in the second round. And so this summer in free agency, you saw Neil O'Shea put his targets on Chandler Parsons earlier on. That didn't work out, so he immediately went out and signed Evan Turner. After the chips fell, Festus Ezeli ended up being available due to the Kevin Durant signing with the Warriors, so they were able to pick up Festus Ezeli on the cheap, and then they put a bow on the summer by re-signing Myers Leonard and Mo Harkless. So pretty much returning with the same team this fall that the Blazers had last year, minus Chris Kaman, Brian Roberts, Gerald Henderson, plus Evan Turner and Festus Ezeli and Jake Layman, the second round pick, who the Blazers traded for. So I want to get your take early on here, Ben. If you're looking at the way that the Blazers summer played out, what do you make of it initially?
Well, first of all, you left out the fact that Neil gave you a 4-year, $45 million contract. I mean, I don't know how you're just going to gloss over that. I mean, I know he was handing out money to everybody, so hopefully you got a little in your pocket. Brandon's probably in Florida spending some of his new money. We all got paid here, so that's nice. No, it was an expensive summer for sure, and I know there's people out there who are kind of down on that fact because it really ballooned on them quickly. And if you look at, who has the most deals that kind of made you raise your eyebrows in terms of their value, Portland's probably, pretty close to the top of the list. And some of it's just a timing standpoint, guys coming off rookie deals, needing to get re-upped, and, doing that right after a career year where Terry Stotts kind of put them in a good position to succeed. And so it really was going to add up. I mean, coming into the summer, I kind of looked at it like, are they going to play offense or are they going to play defense? In other words, are they going to go out there and make these targeted pitches like you mentioned and really be able to find somebody? Historically, that hasn't been pretty successful for Portland, given the market disadvantages and so forth. Or were they just going to kind of adopt a defensive approach, try to keep the band back together and just sell it as, hey, the postseason run was great, stretch run was great. We pushed the Warriors, so this is going to be our team and our direction. And what wound up happening was actually kind of a combination of both, and that might have been the surprising part to me because I wasn't sure they were going to be willing to spend enough to kind of get both things accomplished, but he did. I mean, he went out, like you mentioned, Chandler Parsons. I think they were chasing a bunch of centers as well in terms of the higher and the bigger names. A lot of those guys either didn't move or moved to sort of bigger markets or back east markets, and so that was probably a pretty quick part of their strategy. And then the Parsons thing, I still don't understand why he picked Memphis, by the way. I think that was a really poor decision by him, but, depending on how his health works out, that could actually favor the Blazers that he kind of passed on it. But then they settle on Evan Turner, and I think of all the moves from the summer, that was the one that I didn't quite get in terms of fit. But in terms of strategy, I do kind of see it. Like, you're going to have to play defense on all these other restricted free agents. Like, you're going to want to pay up to keep a lot of these guys so you don't sacrifice the depth. So you had to kind of spend that salary cap space on somebody. And if he was the best guy on your board, then you kind of want to do it. And to me, it's almost like in a draft situation where, if you're picking 5 and your first 4 guys on your board at 5 go 1, 2, 3, 4 in the draft, you still have to make your pick. Like, you don't just pass because you missed out on your top target. So I think that kind of explains why Evan Turner's money kind of came in where it was. Like I said, I mean, the fit to me, it's really an open question mark. And I think we can get into that a little bit more. But I think that maybe the Blazers are catching a little bit too much flack from a strategic standpoint for why Turner, because I think he was just sort of the best of the available options. Now, in terms of some of the other guys, I mean, part of the thing with playing defense on guys like Myers Leonard, Harkless, and so on and so forth, I'm just not huge fans of any of those guys. So it's fine to keep them, or even an Allen Crabbe. Like, I know you guys love Allen Crabbe. I like Allen Crabbe. If he departed, I certainly, if I was rooting for the Blazers, I wouldn't be heartbroken about it. But, would you rather have one more player who can contribute or not? And one reason why I think the spending spree is kind of justified is the way the landscape of the West is working out. It's kind of playing into the Blazers' hands for the first time in a while. And you look at the second-tier teams, Oklahoma City Thunder, poof. I mean, they are no longer a contender. They're back in the pack, fighting for 6, 7, 8 seed with a whole bunch of other teams. You look at the Spurs. I know Tim Duncan wasn't the same guy last year. They're not going to be the same team without him, not even close. That's going to be a step-back team, no question. Whether, that's a step back to 60 wins or a step back to 50 wins, I mean, that's, kind of a different debate. But they're definitely falling off from where they were last season. You look at the Clippers, they had to pay up to keep some very marginal talents. Guys like Jamal Crawford, Austin Rivers. They had to lose a guy like Jeff Green. They didn't have a bunch of other impact makers. They lost a real key contributor for them with Cole Aldrich. That's a step back team to me. So if you're Portland and you're sort of in the West third tier, timing-wise, if you're going to have this big spending spree, this was the year to kind of do it because all these other teams are coming back the other direction, and this is sort of your chance to pounce. And I think in past years, when have we ever been able to say, like, the Blazers' best-case scenario is the number 2 seed or the number 3 seed in the Western Conference? Now, I'm not predicting that's what's going to happen, but like I think just because of the way that Golden State has consolidated talent at the top, the way a lot of these other teams that were sort of locked in as those second-tier teams have kind of slid back to the pack, like Portland can make an argument that their ceiling is higher entering the 2016-17 season than almost any season in recent memory. And so if there was one year to just kind of like blow all of the money and then try to figure it out later, in other words, do you have to trade Allen Crabbe next summer into a team that has cap space? Or do you have to just dump a guy like Mo Harkless or whoever else it might be? Or do you have to let some of these other guys who are in the big man rotation who might not get enough minutes, do you have to let those guys go next summer for nothing? I think those are reasonable situations to find yourself in. If Paul Allen's willing to pay for it, why not do it? Especially after a season when you were, one of the lowest payrolls in the league, and really getting pretty good value out of guys on very, very small contracts. So I tend to defend what they did this summer from a strategic standpoint more than a lot of people. But here's the flip side to that. If it doesn't work, if there's still this sort of marginal team, then what? And then you're this very, very expensive team that is kind of meh, and now you're facing the feeling of disappointment. You're facing guys who are all on big contracts wanting shots and touches, and you're facing these logjam questions. So I do see some backfire potential here, but I also see what they were trying to do, and I can go along with a lot of it.
So you mentioned Paul Allen opening up the pocketbook this summer and being willing to spend, and we saw that. I'm not really sure how much of a possibility a guy like Hassan Whiteside was, but it didn't seem like he legitimately considered the Blazers. Chandler Parsons Not really sure if that was a leverage play to get more money out of Memphis or whomever else, whatever else team he wanted to go to, or if he genuinely had interest in the Blazers. And so my question is, with the Blazers willing to spend the money and willing to give their pitch to certain free agents, is this, what's the issue here with bringing max level caliber players into Portland? Is this a front office strategy thing? Maybe Neil O'Shea, for whatever reason, is unable to pull it off, or is this just are they victims of circumstance? Is this more of a Portland thing, maybe?
Well, I mean, how many superstars changed teams this summer? I would say one, Kevin Durant. And then you look at everybody else. How many other guys changed teams? I mean, Al Horford, is he a superstar? No. I mean, he's a star and a perennial all-star, but he's not a superstar. So 29 teams or 28 teams are sitting around the league thinking, well, we struck out this summer. And I go on Boston Talk Radio and podcasts every once in a while, and they are as frustrated or more frustrated about their inability to land star players, whether it's trade or free agency, than even Blazers fans are. And they landed Al Horford. Like, they got him. And they were still frustrated like 2 days before they got him, right? So this is a very common phenomenon around the league. I think Portland, just from a geographic standpoint, that is a tough sell. I mean, there's no question about it. I don't live in Portland anymore, but I did for a long time. When you live in Portland, as you know, Portland is the center of the universe. It's an amazing place. If you're from there, if you're a native Oregonian, it's got everything you could possibly want. I miss the gorge. I miss the coast. I miss downtown, amazing diversity of food, just the friendliness of the people. There's so many great things about Portland where if you're from there, it's almost like, well, why doesn't everyone want to live here? And I think that's the ongoing joke, right? It's like everybody's moving to Portland because the secret's out a little bit.
Yep.
So eventually, maybe the NBA free agents will kind of get in on the gravy train and find their way to the Blazers. But I think the geographic thing is definitely part of it. I think the culture thing is certainly part of it. And then just, ultimately, if you have stars in place, if you have guys who have super high usage like Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum, you're going to just not have certain. And there's going to be a lot of guys who just don't even consider you because they view themselves as the number one or the number two guy, right? They want to have the number one or the number two touches, and they're not going to be willing to compromise on role to go to a city that maybe historically hasn't had a lot of big time international global superstars, right? So, whether that's Hassan Whiteside, I don't know if he fits into that category specifically or not, but like if you're talking about, say, the big free agents for next summer, like Blake Griffin. Now, if I'm Blake Griffin, I'm looking at the Blazers roster and saying, well, I got two shoot-first guards in the backcourt. How many touches am I going to get? How much is the offense going to run through me? And if I wanted to play with a ball-dominant point guard, I can just stay in with the Clippers and play with Chris Paul and get my touches and do that. So I do think sometimes existing talent can work against you when it comes to the free agency pitch situation. I'm not saying guys like hate to play. It's nothing personal against Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum. It's just those guys are going to use the ball a lot, and there's only one basketball. So it just makes it a little bit more difficult, increases the degree of difficulty. And I think landing Evan Turner as your number one target at a very, very high price, that kind of sounds about right for where the Blazers are in terms of the pecking order for free agents. That's not fun for Blazers fans to know or understand, but like a good example is like Dwayne Wade. He was like flirting with the Nuggets and flirting with the Bulls before he wound up, going to Chicago after when he was leaving Miami. For how long this summer did you truly believe Dwayne Wade was going to go to the Denver Nuggets?
Zero.
So there you go, right? And what if the rumor had been Dwayne Wade to the Blazers, right? You probably would have felt the same way. And that's just kind of how it goes. So it's one of those chicken and the egg things. The one way Portland's going to be able to get into those conversations for big-time guys is if they're legit championship contenders. If you're a 60-win team, all of a sudden you're like the Spurs. They couldn't get anybody for years and years and years. They show they go back to back-to-back finals. They prove to LaMarcus Aldridge firsthand in the playoffs, look, we're going to kick your blank in the postseason. And all of a sudden now he wants to go play for him, right? And so situations like that can really help with recruiting where, if you're a proven commodity, everybody understands you've got the championship winning formula. Look at the Warriors with Durant. I mean, that's ultimately, I think, why he chose them. He said his number one reason was basketball reasons, right? Or the best basketball fit. And so that can kind of work in your favor if you're kind of an off-the-radar team. But Portland's not quite there yet. But if they do get there, well, then maybe the narrative will change.
Festus did say, Festus Ezeli, when he was interviewed after he signed, he did mention that second round playoff matchup that he had with the Blazers and how impressed he was with their composure and the way they did things, and going to battle against them every night gave him the opportunity to really see what they were doing there. So you're absolutely right, in saying that if you put it out there and you're a successful team and you do things the right way, it's going to attract, free agents at some point. I mean, Festus Ezeli isn't your max level all-star surefire Hall of Fame guy, but that's not a bad get for Neil O'Shea this summer. So I could see why staying the course. I could see why they have confidence staying the course. But
that plays right into what I was trying to say. Sorry to cut you off real quick, but Festus Ezeli doesn't have to sacrifice touches or roll or worry about his fit when he's going to a team like Portland, right? Like, he can look at the Blazers through the lens of he's on a winning team. He sees that this is another winning team or has the potential to continue being a winning team. He can see how he could, fill a massive hole in terms of rim protection and defensive rebounding. He doesn't necessarily need to demand to start. I think he's probably pretty realistic about his body and how he can hold up given how many injury issues he's had in recent years and how many minutes he's been able to log. So that is a pretty clean fit. Like, you don't have to ask him to make a ton of compromises. And so that's why you're able to land a player like that. If he's fully healthy, if he winds up taking Andrew Bogut's starting spot last year, like it kind of looked like he might for a while, it's probably a different negotiation. Certainly it's going to come in at a different price point for the Blazers. But I also think like that pitch is easier because he's not concerned about the basketball.
What is your take on the Festus Ezeli contract? Do you worry for Portland's sake about the fragility of his knees at all?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I mean, you'd have to have your head in the sand if you didn't worry about his durability and health. I mean, just look at his track record. And ultimately, like, the price says a lot because there was tons and tons of centers on the market this summer. Lots and lots of them got ridiculously high offers. Timofey Mozgov.
Oh, dude.
You just go right down the list of these guys. I like Biyombo. I like Maimi a lot. Like, I put those guys on my list of people the Blazers should target. But they got really, really, really expensive. And Ezeli didn't. So that's really tells you all you need to know. It wasn't like he was the last guy in the game of Duck, Duck, Goose, the only one left standing. Like, there was reasons why it took longer. And ultimately, like, he struggled in the postseason too. I mean, I think if you just watch the games, you can kind of tell he wasn't right. Early in the season, he was a really, really nice weapon for them. I mean, he was one of the big keys that really opened up Draymond Green's playmaking. I remember writing a piece early last season about the progress Draymond Green had made as a passer and as a decision maker when he's kind of coming out of those pick and roll situations, playing 4-on-3 against the defense because people are trapping Curry. And one of the reasons why is because he could throw the ball up almost anywhere near the rim, and Ezeli was finishing with authority, sometimes over defenders on those lob plays. And that's the sign of a really healthy guy and a really, a guy who's now a two-way contributor. He's not just a defensive player. He's a guy who can really give you something. We didn't really see that guy down the stretch. Some of that is going to be defenses tightening up and just taking away that. I think some of it also was just sort of his health and mobility. And so, we'll see where it comes in. In terms of whether you worry about him, though, at that price, I just don't really think you worry about him. It's like I was more worried about Greg Oden, getting that 5th year or whatever they gave him after his rookie deal because you just knew he was never going to get on the court, and it was like money just being thrown away. A guy like Ezeli, like, he's shown that he's willing to try to play through it. He can give you something here and there. And if he happens to get his body right for the season, he's going to be an absolutely, great steal. And there wasn't a huge long-term commitment, so I think you're kind of okay with it. But yeah, I mean, I have very muted expectations for sort of what's he going to be. I mean, if you're banking your whole game plan on Ezeli, that's not good.
Yikes! So you're in Los Angeles now, right?
I sure am.
And you brought up that Mozgov trade or the signing this summer. So real quick, what's the local feel there in Los Angeles about that $64 million deal that Mozgov signed?
So unfortunately, I wasn't around LA for very much of July, so I missed the riots over it. But no, I think. I mean, no one has any clue really what the Lakers are doing, but I think ultimately because they finally, got Kobe retired, because they have a really promising prospect in a guy like Ingram, there's finally reasons for Lakers fans to kind of look the other way at some of the mistakes that guys like Jim Buss are making. It's like they're distracted by the new shiny things. Luke Walton, he's a very new shiny toy to distract Lakers fans from some of the mistakes, right? And so the Mozgov thing makes no sense style-wise, fit-wise. I mean, it's just a disaster. Price, length. I mean, you just go right down the list. It's just so dumb. And the funny part was I gave it a D plus on my grade because it was one of the very first moves that got done. And you don't want to come out of the gate if you have to grade like 50 signings over the course of a month, which I do. You don't want to come out of the gate and give it like an F minus because you have to give yourself some wiggle room in case someone else comes along and just gets some ludicrous offer. And then I immediately was getting text messages from people saying, "Oh, you've gone soft. Like you're going to give him a D plus for that. Like what happened to the old Golliver? Like you would have killed that move harder." And I'm like, I was pretty mean about it. Like give me a break. But no, that was a mess. And their offseason was okay though. They bring back Clarkson. He's all right. Deng can kind of be the guy who teaches Ingram, how to play. There's a connection there from Duke. There's a connection there from really skinny long arms. But I think, their whole season and their whole franchise comes down to whether Ingram can be a superstar and whether Russell can figure it out and not be a knucklehead. Those are sort of the two big questions. So whether Mozgov standing in the paint is going to really get in the way of either one of those questions, I'm not sure. But no, I didn't hear a lot of Lakers fans really excited about it. And I did hear actually that was one of the most viewed posts from the summer was the Mozgov grade. So that usually tells you that there's a lot of people who are ticked off out there.
No surprise there. I can already see the Blazers Edge listeners in the comments section lighting me up for talking about the Lakers for 3 minutes on a podcast with Ben Golliver here. So getting back to the Blazers, looking at this roster and, bringing back all the guys that they did and only, in terms of guys who contributed on the floor, getting rid of losing Gerald Henderson, that's really it. And then bringing in Turner and Ezeli, re-signing all those guys, assuming full health. They have a ton of depth at pretty much in the front court and the back court. And I know you look at Damian Lillard, CJ McCollum, they're kind of on a tier of their own on this team. And then there seems to be like 7, 8, 9 maybe guys that are just kind of in this glut there behind them who all have, they're all relatively similarly aged. Some of them are making more money than others. And it seems like a lot of these guys are going to be able to contribute. But I can't think of a time when Terry Stotts seemed very comfortable running a 9, 10, 11 man rotation. And so I'm wondering off the bat here, your thoughts on how Terry Stotts is going to, maybe let things shake out with this lineup here and all this depth that he has all of a sudden.
Yeah, for sure. Well, so just to go back to the contracts real quick, because I think it's very pertinent to this conversation. I think one of the underrated aspects, at least nationally, of the CJ McCollum early extension that they gave him is that you very firmly reestablish your pecking order, right? Like if you're CJ McCollum and you're on a rookie deal and you're sitting around this summer and you watch Crabbe get paid, Turner get paid, Harkless get paid, you just go right down the list of all these guys who are getting these monster numbers, right? And you're sitting there making $2-3 million. Obviously, for us as media chumps, that'd be amazing money. But for an NBA player, all of a sudden Alan Crabbe's making 6 times more money than you make. Then you start to wonder, like, what's really the game plan here? And I think the smartest part about doing that McCollum extension, again, I like McCollum. I don't love him. I like him on a max number. That's the market rate, so you just go ahead and do it. It's a defensible move from a financial standpoint, but it's a really good move from a locker room standpoint because now you're recommitting and saying, look, Dame and CJ are the guys, and not only are we just saying that as lip service, we're not going behind their back to try to trade them at the deadline or anything else. Like, this is their team. And so I think when you're the top of your pecking order, and that's been a problem for the Blazers in the past, go back to Dame and LaMarcus, go back to LaMarcus and Brandon, go back to Greg Oden not touching the ball for like 2 seasons, the very brief time he was healthy. I mean, remember that one time when I charted that he got more offensive rebound touches than he got from passes from his teammates? I mean, like, yeah, like, I mean, it was pretty bad there for a while. And so that kind of pecking order stuff is very, very important. And when you spend as much money as Neil did this summer, you got to make sure everybody's on the same page with that. So that helps to answer some of these rotation questions that you're asking. You know who's going to start, number one. There's not going to be a situation where you try to talk yourself into moving CJ into a super sixth man role or anything like that. You've committed to him. That might have already been obvious, but now it's obvious to everyone within the locker room. Like a guy like Evan Turner, I'm not saying this is his mentality, but if he gets that big contract, he might come in and think, well, if I beat CJ out in training camp, like maybe I could take that job, right? Or someone else might have delusions of grandeur, right? Now that's just been solved. So you come into training camp and just all that stuff's just not even an issue. I think the Aminu at the 4 thing worked so well, and he's such a good defender in terms of defending up a position that's pretty much locked in. And I think just given the success they had down the stretch, your Stotts is not going to be in a mood to really tinker a ton. That would be my assumption. I think he would try to keep things as similar to it was at the end of last season to start this season, and try to fit in the new pieces or the emerging pieces around that core group. And so I think the big question there is, do you start Turner at the 3 to open the season, or do you try to ease him in right off the bat into a sixth man role? To me, that's got to be his role, like longer term. I don't think the Dame, CJ, and Turner together thing makes any sense at all. I think playing any two of those guys together, or always having two of those guys on the court throughout a 48-minute game, so you always have multiple playmakers and ball handlers, I think that makes a lot of sense. But I don't see the benefit in playing those guys real minutes together, all three of them. I just think it's going to take away from just how the offense works, the flow, and ultimately someone's going to sacrifice who shouldn't need to be sacrificing. And the last thing you want to do is bring in a guy like Turner, who's supposed to be this playmaker, and he's cutting into Damian shots, or he's cutting into CJ McCollum shots, right? Mm-hmm. So I think the big question to me is, who do you settle on, Crabbe or Harkless as your starting 3? I think ideally, and from a contract standpoint, you might want to start with Crabbe there if you think you can get by with it, but maybe not. I mean, I think that's definitely a training camp battle to watch. In terms of the front court, I would continue to roll with Plumlee as the starter. I'm a big fan of something that I kind of saw the Raptors do, which is start with offense, close with defense. Especially in the postseason, they were doing that a lot. Where and Valanciunas was injured, so that was part of it. But they even did that during the regular season too, where you're starting with your big man, who's a scoring threat or who's a more offensive-oriented player. But when it comes down to kind of crunch time, you're going with your best defensive 5. And I think Ezeli is going to be part of your best defensive 5, but he can't necessarily play 30 minutes a game. And so how do you space those minutes out? If you kind of save him for the fourth quarter, maybe that's sort of the best case situation. And then that it still gives Plumlee a chance to feel like, okay, he's still involved. They still care about me. They may still pay me. They're at least putting me in a position where I can cash in on my next contract. So this summer didn't really kind of screw with his life. And that's good, because you don't want a guy like him to check out. So I think the big question then is, like, what minutes are left for Myers Leonard? And frankly, what does Myers do at this point? I'm not sure. So that's not a priority. And I don't think Stotts would have any problem leveling with Myers and saying, look, you're not doing enough to get on the court, except for a minor role, and you can just kind of be injury protection. And then I think the same thing goes for Ed Davis. I mean, that's been kind of the story of Ed Davis's career. He continually he gets people excited. And then ultimately, like, other pieces kind of come in and he has to wind up sacrificing. So if that happens again, I wouldn't be shocked by that. And the other guy I haven't even mentioned is Noah Vonleh. And, after seeing him at Summer League, has there been progress?
It's hard to tell, man.
So that's what I'm saying. So I think he's another real natural sacrifice candidate. So I actually think, even though they've got depth at every position, once you kind of talk through it and you think about these things, like, there's a pretty clear order almost at every single position in terms of what your priorities are, and it matches up fairly closely with the salaries, and that's a good thing. So to me, the two biggest questions are, how long does it take to convince Evan Turner to come off the bench? Hopefully it's quickly if you're the Blazers. Two, Crab or Harkless. Can Crab defend threes? And can you get by with Damian, CJ, and Crab as your three perimeter defenders? That's tough. So I don't know if you can, and so that might wind up tilting things in Harkless's favor. And if so, then you've got kind of a potent second unit where you're dealing with Turner on the ball and Crab as an off-ball shooter, and that's interesting. So I guess if I had to say how I would do it, I would say I'd start Damian, CJ, Harkless, Aminu, Plumlee. My second unit would have, the primary ball handler being Turner, with him playing significant minutes with both Damian and CJ in sort of a staggered setup. So he's kind of getting time with both of them. I'd have a nice little second unit role for Crab and be encouraging him to kind of play his way into as many minutes as he can handle. And then I'd be trying to think about using Ezeli as my closing big if I could. And then everybody else is going to kind of have to fit in around those guys. So that may wind up being 8 or 9 guys. But that's kind of how I would do it.
That's kind of what I'm thinking here, because I hear the suggestion from people from time to time saying that Terry Stotts having so much depth could lead to him playing his matchups depending on the opponent, and I'm kind of thinking about that, and I'm looking at the rotations that he's had in the past. Now, he's probably never had this amount of depth on a team, so this is going to be a little bit new to see how he does that. But in terms of seeing how he's worked things out the last 4 or 5 seasons with the Blazers, you have your starters playing quite a few minutes, and then you have your handful of guys coming off the bench in a short 8 or 9 rotation. Then you have guys like Myers Leonard, guys like Mo Harkless last season for stretches getting DNP CDs, just completely being out of the rotation. And you saw with when Batum got hurt, I think it was 2 years ago, Crab came out of nowhere from out of the rotation to start so that he could preserve the rotation that he had going, rather than changing who he started based on the matchups. And you saw that again when LaMarcus got hurt and Myers Leonard was promoted to starter. And then again when Myers Leonard was starting and got hurt and Noah Vonleh came out of nowhere and was promoted. And those moves seemed to be made in order to preserve that rotation that Stotts had going. So I don't want to say that Terry Stotts is not a dynamic coach, because that wouldn't be fair to say at all. I think looking at what he's done with what he's had has been incredibly impressive. But looking at Terry Stotts and his track record and wondering if he's going to be, have very fluid rotations and a willingness to switch up the starting lineup, I don't know if that's something that I envision happening. Is that fair to say?
Well, I think kind of one of the points you're coming at is that second unit chemistry is a really hard thing to capture. And once you've got it, you don't want to shake that up, because your stars, you could put Damian out there, he's going to get 30 no matter who you're throwing around him, right? And that's why you can do that plug starter like a Crab, like you're mentioning a few years ago, or like Leonard in for Aldridge or whatever, because those guys are still going to be able to do their jobs almost regardless of who's around them. But when you have that second unit and you find a combination that works, that's when you really don't want to shake it up, because it's just so much more volatile. And so, if Stotts finds himself in a position where, Turner and Crab, that turns out to be a really good second unit combination. They're just able to play off each other. Crab, pretty good off-ball player, doesn't really need to pound a lot. Turner has a tendency to really want to, keep the ball in his hands, and it just kind of balances out and it works. If somebody gets injured in the starting lineup, I could see why he would make the same kind of decision that you're talking about and saying, look, we don't want to break Turner and Crab up. They've got something going. Let's see who we can kind of plumb from the depths of the DMP list, or the really bottom part of the rotation to kind of make that work. But another thing to keep in mind too is this is probably going to be a pretty good team. I mean, it should be a pretty good team. If they're not good, something went pretty seriously wrong, right? So all the talk about regular season rotations and all that, the Vonleh thing is a great example. How much did the Vonleh starting thing matter when it came to April?
It was all, that experiment was over by then.
Yeah, and so push came to shove, and they made their call on Vonleh, and that's going to happen when you're a good team. That happens for good teams around the league all the time. And so sometimes when you have depth, you're really just using it to kind of keep the minutes off your best players in an ideal situation. as you go through the first 3 or 4 months of the season. And once you get closer to the finish line, you're going to be leaning more and more heavily on your best players. And by the time the second round came along, I mean, CJ McCollum and Damian Lillard, these guys were wheezing because they were playing like 44 minutes a night against the Warriors, right? I mean, these guys were like doubled over trying to, catch their breath. And they're obviously very fit guys, but they were just being, basically run into the ground. And so I think, is that really going to change with all this offseason moves? Are you still going to find yourself, if it's a second round playoff game, running Damian and CJ out there for 40 plus minutes in a game with everybody else just fitting in? Do you see that really changing too much? Because I'm not sure I necessarily do.
I mean, based on the last 4 or 5 years that we're looking at, I imagine you'll have those guys playing pretty heavy minutes all season. I don't see this swing over to a Greg Popovich approach where you try to keep everybody's averages under 30 minutes. That doesn't seem likely, right?
Well, yeah, it depends on how good they are. I mean, that's a luxury of a team that's really winning games at a big-time clip. I think you could probably pull their minutes down a little bit during the regular season. I guess when I think about rotations, and this is a good team kind of problem, like you're thinking about your postseason rotation almost at the beginning of the season as opposed to what you're going to look like in November and December, right? Like the Blazers are no longer that team that they came into last season where everybody was wondering how many games are they even going to win, right? Like this is a team with serious aspirations and big time spending that expects to be in the playoffs. So if you're in the playoffs and you really are locked into your top 8 guys, who's going to be in, who's going to be out, and how many of those guys are going to be different from last year, I'm not sure how much change there's really going to be. And then when you're really locked in, like you have to win the game to extend your season, how many guys are you going to play? And we saw Stotts, he got pretty tight with that rotation. Yeah. And when you're looking at their pecking order, outside of Turner and then situationally maybe Ezeli, did any of the moves really shake up that pecking order that much? I don't know. So to me, I think they're going to look pretty similar next April compared to what they look like last April.
Yeah, I think the rotations are going to be based for the regular season mostly on A, health, and then B, how good guys look in practice, and C, if you value development, whether or not they value it at all. That's going to play into Myers Leonard and Noah Vonleh, guys like that. I think those are the 3 factors there that are really going to play into the regular season rotations. But another question that this tends to bring up when you have this amount of talent at this many different positions is the possibility of a quote-unquote roster consolidating trade where you take 2 or 3 of these guys who are second tier, maybe second unit type players. The Blazers certainly have a glut of those type of players right now, and you maybe package them with a future draft pick or a guy with that another team sees some promise in, like maybe, a lot of people think that's Vonleh. 29 other teams might not think that right now. At any rate, the roster consolidation trade seems to be the method that a lot of Blazer fans seem to think is inevitable at some point, or to think that bringing in that third guy is something that they're going to have to do, and in order to do it, they're going to have to clear up some of these average to a little bit above average type players. So I want to ask you, Ben, is this something that really is, A, is it really all that common in the NBA? And B, looking at the Blazers roster, is this something that you think Neil O'Shea could pull off in the next year or so?
I would be pretty skeptical of that happening within the next year. There's a few different reasons for that, and some of them have to do with Portland, and some of them just have to do with sort of conditions in general. But number one, if you're trading away a superstar, you're usually doing that with a gun to your head. That's just kind of how those guys go, right? And so if you're doing that, the formula has been you want super young prospects on rookie deals with significant upside who have shown you something. You want other guys, proven players on value contracts. In other words, guys who are sort of below market producers who you can kind of fit into your rotation. And you want draft picks, and preferably really, really good draft picks, like lottery picks, ideally top 5 picks, ideally top 3 picks. When I look at Portland's roster and when I look at just their sort of asset pile at this point, I don't really see a lot of players or assets that kind of fit those categories, right? Who of the guys who have just gotten paid are really going to be kind of considered below market assets? To me, on Portland's roster, the guys who you would even make that argument for would be players like Aminu or Ed Davis, or maybe Mason Plumlee, because he's still on a pretty cheap deal. And that's sort of it. Are any of those guys really viewed as sort of needle moving type players? I think you could get some interest in Aminu, like if the Blazers season just went completely south for whatever reason, and they just decided, we're going to almost enter like a proto tank mode. You could definitely auction off Aminu and get a pretty solid asset for it. But is he going to be the headlining type player of a consolidation trade for a superstar caliber guy? I definitely don't see that. And same thing with Ed Davis. I mean, he's been bouncing around a million times. He's a journeyman. He's a valuable journeyman. He's an underrated guy who was probably in the Sixth Man of the Year conversation last year. People take him for granted. All those things are true, but that's not necessarily going to be sort of the linchpin of this package, right? You look at the Blazers draft assets, nothing necessarily to write home about there. And then you look at the young guys on rookie deals, and like you mentioned, Noah Vonleh, like unless you're trading with one of Noah's parents, I don't know how you're going to get like a superstar level guy if your package is built around Noah Vonleh. And some of that is just kind of the feel from Summer League. I mean, there was just zero buzz around him. And usually you have a guy going back multiple times to Las Vegas. He shows this real steady improvement. He starts to build some buzz. People start to fear him a little bit. Like Trey Lyles is a good example of that. And he goes back and puts up huge numbers in Summer League, one or two games that he plays. And then, okay, like he's done. You can shut him down for the rest of the week because he kind of showed that he almost doesn't belong there. I never really got that feeling this summer from Noah Vonleh. He was just kind of washing out into the mix of the other guys. And I was a guy, I liked Noah. I liked the idea of trading for him at the time that they did that, but it's not quite clicking yet. So I think his value is very low, certainly below what it was when they acquired him, because he's already used up some of his rookie year value or rookie contract value because he's been going on that deal now. Whether this is his third year or fourth year, so you don't get the value from that, and he's 1 year removed from, or he's one less year removed from his ceiling, right? And he hasn't made the significant progress. So now you have to start to wonder, like, really, what's his best case scenario? So that's the long-winded way of saying I don't really know if I had a superstar what I would want from the Blazers, and I think I would have a hard time kind of constructing a package when a lot of the pieces who would be thrown in, as like second or third type players, are making nearly max money. So it just makes the contracts difficult to work with, right? Like you can't throw an Allen Crabbe into that trade because he might make more than the superstar who's coming back, right? And so it just gets tricky. So I think that's part of it. I think another thing too is just in general, these kinds of trades are very difficult to put together. And part of the reason why they're so hard to put together is the players have lots of leverage. And a lot of times the players can kind of steer the talks towards markets where they actually want to go or where they're willing to be traded to. And so now you're dealing with a situation where it's not just do you have enough assets to go trade for a player, but like, does that player really, is he intent on going to the Blazers? And we get back to that situation I mentioned earlier where, okay, are there enough shots? Are there enough touches? If you're a superstar type guy, do you really have Portland circled as your number one destination where you really want to be traded to? And that's a really tough sell. I think if I'm looking at potential trades for the Blazers, I think a more likely scenario is that, one of these very expensive wings is going to get traded to a team that's got salary cap space, it's got a low payroll, that is willing to either part say with a draft pick or maybe with a guy who is still on a rookie deal because they view Allen Crabbe or like an Evan Turner or a Harkless as an upgrade over their current talent. And that kind of trade's not going to happen until at least the deadline or maybe next summer, right? But there's teams out there like, say, the Denvers of the world or the Philadelphias of the world or some of these other teams that the Orlando Magics of the world where or even the Phoenix Suns, like just teams that have been kind of spinning their wheels. They don't really have an identity. They're not really getting guys in free agency, but they have cap space and they need talent. So they say, all right, well, we'll absorb this gigantic contract that you paid to your player because we need a guy really bad to fill this hole, and we'll send you back a first-round pick for him. Like I think those are the kinds of trades that are more likely for the Blazers than one where you're putting multiple big contracts together or multiple assets together to try to go get a superstar home run type guy. But I think when you're Portland, a lot of it is timing, right? Like if you're willing to pay the money this year, take your shot. If it doesn't work, that's too bad. If it does work, like enjoy the ride. But if it doesn't work, you get into next summer, and now you kind of have an auction. You have a better sense for who fits, who doesn't. Can you dangle Evan Turner for any kind of a draft pick, or do you just trade away an Allen Crabbe for nothing because you think, well, we don't want to pay him these next couple of years, and somebody else is willing to take his contract. It just didn't work out, and we're going to move on and try to slash payroll. I think those are more likely the type of moves that if you're the Blazers, you're going to make. And I think also, like, if you're a fan, I mean, this is Dame and CJ's team. I think that's the way to look at it for the next 5 years. If they get another player who's going to usurp one of those two guys' role and become a top two guy on this roster, it would be very, very, very surprising. And so if we're talking about like best third options in terms of, a trade, that's not going to be a star player. That's going to be a Nicholas Batum type player. And then, how excited are you really for that type of trade? So I would tamp down all the trade expectations. I would say enjoy this season because the owner completely loaded up and because so many of these other teams have fallen apart, that there's a real window here to make some pretty significant noise. It might happen, it might not. But that would be my general message on that.
So I want to wrap here with just a few questions that we got from Twitter real quick for you. The first one here comes from at Superset Greg on Twitter. They ask, the best thing for the Blazers long term is not having LaMarcus Aldridge around, yes or no? So basically, if the 2015 summer ended up the opposite way it actually ended up, would that have been better for the Blazers or worse?
Great question. I think you can make arguments both ways. Personally, I think that just the relationship between Damian and LaMarcus wasn't the worst in the league. This wasn't, Dwight Howard, the rumored Dwight Howard, everybody hates Dwight Howard, kind of like nightmarish scenario. But I don't think those guys necessarily made each other a lot better, right? And so I think you can make a very compelling argument that because of that, it's better to move on. Now, do you want to lose a guy like LaMarcus Aldridge for nothing in free agency? I think that's a different question, right? Like, if you could go back and redo it, was there any way to get something for him? I think that would be sort of more an ideal situation. But I think the recovery and the rally from losing LaMarcus was way better than I expected. I am still a big-time LaMarcus defender. I know he's a polarizing player around the league. He's probably a pretty polarizing player in Portland because he left. I still think he brings a lot to the table. I still think he's generally underrated by basically everyone. But if he wasn't getting along with Damian and it wasn't going to make both of them, the best players they could be, then you don't want to stick with that broken pairing, and you do see that around the league sometimes where, teams try to force the superstar combos that just don't quite work. And I think in hindsight, that's sort of the decision that Kevin Durant made too, right? Like he and Westbrook were the most exciting teammates for the last couple of seasons. But there was always little tensions here. And I was always kind of willing to excuse it to say, hey, the greater good is this team just always wins 60 games when they're healthy. They're constantly winning playoff series. They're a nightmare matchup for everybody. But if both of those guys don't feel like they can be the best version of themselves with each other, then you should leave because that's not good. That's a big time fundamental problem. So even though I think, the Blazers, even though I was really in on the Blazers trying to keep LaMarcus no matter what at the time, because I thought he was just that good of a player, I think you can make a very strong counter argument that says, well, they're not necessarily quote unquote better off without him, but they're not desperately missing him like I think I expected them to.
Right. Yeah, I think we all of it. I mean, you saw Vegas say 26.5 wins after the fallout from that. So I think across the board, a lot of people expected it to affect the team a lot more than it actually did. And the emergence of guys, Dame taking it to the next level and CJ emerging, and Aminu playing the way he did, I think that really surprised a lot of people, which was a very pleasant surprise, and we're excited to see where they take it this year.
Well, but imagine this. Imagine they had re-signed Aldridge, and now Aldridge was your trade chip. You know what I mean?
Okay, that's fair.
So that might have been the best case scenario, right? Where you keep him for 1 year, maybe you get some significant growth from CJ because you don't have Wesley there anymore. Maybe Aminu plugs in for Batum pretty well, But I think the best case scenario for them probably would have been, maybe it wouldn't have led to the playoff series victory, or maybe it would have. I don't know. But if Portland was in a situation now where they're dangling LaMarcus Aldridge as part of one of these consolidation trades, and you're saying, okay, we've got this guy we can throw out there, and we're looking for a better fit alongside Damian and CJ, now that is like the A1 best case scenario. So I think if I had to like give a firm answer to that question, I think the Blazers would have been best off re-signing LaMarcus because it would have opened up even more possibilities for them. They would have just had a greater talent cache, but the recovery has been great.
All right, so here's one where we don't have to employ the use of 2020 hindsight vision. This one comes from Blazers Edge's own Timmy, who does most of the moderating for us and manages the moderating staff. Shout out to Tim. He asks, yo, Ben, is Portland ever going to get that hotel built, and would that really even matter in getting an all-star game?
The hotel and the logistics clearly matters to the NBA, and I think that's one of the reasons why this whole naming the replacement site for Charlotte's taking so long. I mean, to me, the obvious thing was say, hey, just take the All-Star game, put it in Orlando. If the big issue is this HB2 bill, which is making people uncomfortable because it's infringing on LGBT rights, what better city to pick than Orlando, where there was this horrific tragedy? You could try to spin this awful negative into a positive, give that local community money, raise millions for awareness, and you could have gotten it done quickly. But apparently there was some issues potentially, or at least this was kind of rumored or scuttlebutt in Las Vegas, that booking out however many hotels it takes to bring down the entire league office and all the various team representatives and so on and so forth was kind of tricky in Orlando on short notice, right? So if it's an issue for a city like Orlando, which has hosted an All-Star game before, then it's definitely an issue for Portland. Now, the one thing about Adam Silver that I didn't expect necessarily was this whole cold weather idea, which was never a thing basically during the David Stern era. At least when I was reporting, it was always like LA, Orlando, Houston. Like there was a real clear preference for good weather. After surviving both New York and Toronto barely, and actually some people will tell you they thought I died in Toronto from the cold. That works in Portland's favor because like at least the weather thing is not like you can't complain about rain in February if it was freaking like -13 in Toronto and my iPhone was like shutting itself off because it couldn't operate. So I think if you can get the hotel rooms for whatever, you guys probably following that locally understand the specifics of where the hotels need to be better than I do. But here's my limited experience because I travel back to Portland now and so I have to book hotels, pretty regularly. And I pretty much exclusively use Marriott. But there aren't that many options that are super close to the Rose Garden from Marriott. And if you go city by city in terms of where other places I stay, whether it's in Oakland or the Bay Area, whether it's Chicago, New York, Miami, I mean a lot of these other cities that are sort of in the mix, either for All-Star games or for like postseason weekends or whatever. It can be hard to find the space. And even a place like Cleveland, I mean, that's the reason why they got the RNC, right? Because they built these brand new, huge hotels that were there for the finals. And some of them were really, really, really nice. And they were huge. So I definitely think from an accommodation standpoint, that's part of it. Also, you need to have multiple venues. Are you really going to try to trot out the Memorial Coliseum for like the fan jam? Or is that going to have to be in the convention center downtown? I mean, where are you going to put that? And it has to be convenient because people want to get to it. And I mean, the traffic is a whole different issue. I mean, traffic is a big deal in a lot of different cities, but parking and traffic are huge logistical concerns. And I mean, they freak out when the Winterhawks and the Blazers play the same night, right? Well, let me tell you, like the All-Star game's a little bit wilder than that in terms of how many fans are getting there, right? So I think logistically, Portland faces some really serious challenges. I think it's awesome that they continue to push for it. I'm not necessarily banking on Portland getting one here in the near future. And I'm also really happy they're returning to the warm weather for LA. I think it's next year, not this coming year, but the following year. And we'll see kind of where it goes from there. But there's also a lot of stiff competition because all these cities want to host it. It's kind of bragging rights. Even a place like Charlotte, like Michael Jordan sounded like he really, really, really wanted it. And Michael Jordan's pretty influential. Like if you're in a meeting with the NBA Board of Governors and you're negotiating and you're making your offer and then Michael Jordan, the GOAT, comes up after you, that's tough. Like, yeah, no offense, Chris McGowan, like you might lose that one, and that's not any knock on him. It's just, the facts of it.
That's fair to say. I mean, maybe eventually in the future, if the city of Portland decides to stop building the cookie cutter generic townhouse condos that they seem to be putting up all around town right now, maybe put up a few more hotels to facilitate that. But nevertheless, it could happen in the future. I want to wrap here. We have one more question. This is from Lillard for Mayor at @RipCitizen_NBA. Asks, do the Blazers have a legitimate chance of having a top 12 defense this upcoming season?
That's a great question. I mean, we were going back talking earlier about how important Ezeli is, right? Like, I think that he's sort of the key to that. If he's giving you consistent minutes night in, night out, and he's that defensive backline presence, that's going to cover up for the obvious deficiencies at other positions. I don't see massive improvement coming from any of those wing guys because, again, they're going to be still having really hard, heavy offensive burdens. And so at some point, something has to give. It's a common problem around the league. You can't just tell Damian Lillard, play harder on defense. It doesn't work that way. I mean, he's a pretty committed guy. He's trying, but he also has to do a lot of other things, and he's fairly easy to screen. And, that's just kind of one of those things where there might not be a solution there. So Ezeli is going to be huge. I mean, and the same thing defensively, guys like Myers Leonard, Noah. I mean, are any of these guys going to make a big leap? Plumlee. I mean, I guess it's possible. I don't necessarily see it. So I think the formula still for Portland is going to be offense first. I mean, I think that's pretty clear. But I do think, they found something defensively with that Harkless-Aminu combination, because now you finally had some length and versatility where you could kind of move those guys around, where even if possessions went deep and you had to switch multiple times for whatever reason, because those guys are sort of interchangeable, you didn't necessarily get yourself in horrible situations. Does Harkless stick out a little bit more on some of that stuff than Aminu? Yeah, I think he kind of does, but it's better than the alternative or whatever they were. If you're banking on Evan Turner to save the day on the defensive end, I think that's asking way too much. To answer his question, I would probably guess no, but I don't know if that would be a season-defining accomplishment, right? Like, if they did it, yes, they're going to be an amazing squad, mm-hmm. but I think you could still be a really good team, especially given the lay of the land in the Western Conference, if you're just average defense. If you're 15 to 18 on defense and your offense, say, is top 8, you should be really good this year.
All right, man. So we got about 2.5 months till the season kicks off here in mid-August. We got a few more weeks of the dog days of summer until training camp type stuff starts coming out. So, Ben, it's always really nice catching up with you, man. Maybe we'll have you back around the time the season starts.
That sounds good. How's everything going with the site? Give me the short rundown. What's new?
It's going. So since you went to SI, we had the staff of it was me, you, Timmy, Dave, and then Sam Tung. There was like 5 of us, and Dane Carba. And then after that, I think we went up to like 15 people or so for the next season. And then right now we're at about 24 staff members or so. Dave right now is taking a pretty, he's taking somewhat of a vacation a bit and letting some of the other editors at the site were kind of running the show a little bit. And things are going really well. I mean, their traffic is as big as it's ever been, which is pretty crazy. We've been topping SB Nation's list for basketball for most of the summer in the top 5, which has been awesome. So shout out to all the listeners and all the readers for helping us achieve those kind of milestones. But everything seems to be humming along pretty well, man.
That's fantastic to hear. I'm glad that, the team's pretty easy to cheer for at this point. I was at all the second round games, unfortunately. From the Blazers standpoint, I was at that Steph Curry overtime explosion at the Moda Center. I felt awful for my fellow Oregonians that night. I saw their games against the Clippers down in LA. So it was very cool that even though I was kind of like geographically detached from the team, that they were relevant during the postseason. And I saw them play 5 against the Warriors, and I think 3 against the Clippers, if I'm not mistaken. And that's pretty good. Like, how many times can we say that from the last decade or 15 years of watching the Blazers? So that was very cool. I kind of felt like I was almost like an exchange student watching them. But that was good. And it's great to hear that the site's going well. I mean, the team, I don't want everyone to think that I'm like just absolutely gung-ho about this Blazers squad. Like there's definitely still some underlying issues, and it's always dangerous to say, hey, the last 20 games is going to necessarily carry over to the following season. But I do continue to harp on that idea that like the conditions are right for a team to make a jump. And I think Utah is going to make a really nice jump this year through the West just based on their offseason moves and getting guys healthy. And I think after Utah, in terms of teams that could really, take a step forward, I like the Blazers' ability to do that. Memphis, if they can keep Mark healthy, they're potentially going to be able to do that. I don't really see Dallas doing that. As I mentioned, some of those other teams, San Antonio, Clippers, Thunder, they're all falling off, to a significant degree. So for the first time in a while, I think the West is going to look different in the postseason picture. And I think that, all signs point to Portland potentially being able to capitalize on that.
Dang, man, I really love the optimism, Ben. We'll definitely have to have you back on soon.
All right, sounds good.
Okie doke, episode 162 of the Blazers Edge podcast is all wrapped up. I'd like to thank you very much for joining us this week. I'd also like to give a huge thanks to Ben Golliver for returning to the show. If you like the intro music, as always, that was performed by local beatmaker and producer Odar. You can hear more of his work at soundcloud.com/OdarBeats. This week we have a special guest contributor for the outro that is provided by Trey. So shout out to Trey and big thanks to him. Make sure and tune into the Blazers Edge podcast early next week to hear Dave Deckard and Dan Meringue. I'm Chris Lucia. I'll be back with the Blazers Edge podcast next weekend.